Welcome back, everyone. This is day 2 of my boyfriend, Maslow, and B-Cognition and peak experiences, or growth and cognition is the whole chapter for the psychology of being. I am the goddess of radical self-love, for those of you who have forgotten by now. And this is MECA, Make Everyone Count Always. We are a support network for radical self-love, self-care, and master manifesting. I don't know why I'm saying that since I'm piecing this together right now. I'm thinking that's how it will work. I'll piece it all together. We'll see. Yes. So, there are substantial differences between the cognition that abstracts and categorizes and the fresh cognition of the concrete, the raw, and the particular. This is the sense in which I shall use the terms abstract and concrete. They are not very different from Goldstein's term. Most of our cognitions, attendings, perceivings, rememberings, thinkings, and learnings are abstract rather than concrete. That is, we mostly categorize, schematize, classify, and abstract in our cognitive life. We do not so much cognize the nature of the world as it is, as we do the organization of our own inner world outlook. Most of experience is filtered through our system of categories, constructs, and rubrics, as Schatzel has also pointed out in his classical paper on childhood amnesia and the problem of memory. I was led to this differentiation by my studies of self-actualizing people, finding in them simultaneously the ability to abstract without giving up concreteness and the ability to be concrete without giving up abstractness. This adds a little to Goldstein's description because I found not only a reduction to the concrete, but also what we might call a reduction to the abstract, i.e. a loss of ability to cognize the concrete. Since then, I have found the same exceptional ability to perceive the concrete in good artists and clinicians as well, even though not self-actualizing. More recently, I find the same ability in ordinary people in their peak moments. They are then more able to grasp the percept in its own concrete, idiosyncratic nature. Since this kind of idiographic perceiving has customarily been described as the core of aesthetic perceiving, as for instance by Northrop, they have almost been made synonymous. For most philosophers and artists, to perceive a person concretely in his intrinsic uniqueness is to perceive him aesthetically. I prefer the broader usage and think that I have already demonstrated that this kind of perception of the unique nature of the object is characteristic of all peak experiences, not only the aesthetic one. It is useful to understand the concrete perceiving which takes place in B-Cognition as a perception of all aspects and attributes of the object simultaneously or in quick succession. Abstracting is, in essence, a selection out of certain aspects only of the object, those which are of use to us, those which threaten us, those which we are familiar, or those which fit our large language category. Sorry. Both Whitehead and Bergson have made this sufficiently clear. Hi, Laurel. Okay, sweetie, sit down. Sit, sit, sit. Good girl. Great. Now I don't know. There you go. As have many other philosophers. Abstractions, to the extent that they are useful, are also false. In a word, to perceive an object abstractly means not to perceive some aspects of it. It clearly implies a selection of some attributes, rejection of other attributes, creation or distortion still of others. We make of it what we wish. We create it. We manufacture it. Furthermore, extremely important is the strong tendency in abstracting to relate the aspects of the object to our linguistic system. This makes special troubles because language is a secondary rather than a primary process in the Freudian sense, because it deals with external reality rather than psychic reality, with the conscious rather than the unconscious. It is true that this lack can be correlated to some extent by poetic or rhapsodic language, but in the last analysis, much of experience is inevitable and can be put into no language at all. Let us take, for example, the perception of a painting or of a person. In order to perceive them fully, we must fight our tendency to classify, to compare, to evaluate, to need, to use. The moment we say this man is blank, a foreigner, in that moment we have classified him, performed an abstracting act, and to some extent cut ourselves off from the possibility of seeing him as a unique and whole human being, different from any other one in the whole world. In the moment that we approach the painting on the wall to read the name of the artist, we have cut ourselves off from the possibility of seeing it with complete freshness in its own uniqueness. To a certain extent, then, what we call knowing, i.e., the placing of an experience in a system of concepts or words or relations, cuts off the possibility of full cognizing. Herbert Reed has pointed out that the child has the innocent eye, the ability to see something as if he were seeing it for the first time. He can then stare at it in wonder, examining all aspects of it, taking in all its attributes. Since for the child in this situation, no attribute of a strange object is any more important than any other attribute, he does not organize it, he simply stares at it. He savors the qualities of the experience in the way that Cantrill and Murphy have described. In the similar situation for the adult, to the extent that we can prevent ourselves from only abstracting, naming, placing, comparing, relating to that extent, we will be able to see more and more aspects of the many-sidedness of the person or of the painting. Particularly, I must underline the ability to perceive the ineffable. I don't know how to say this for some reason. That which cannot be put into words. Trying to force it into words changes it and makes it something other than it is, something else like it, something similar and yet something different than itself. It is the ability to perceive the whole and to rise above parts which categorize, cognize in the various peak experiences. Since only thus can one know a person in the fullest sense of the word, it is not surprising that self-actualizing people are so much more astute in their perception of people, in their penetration to the core or essence of a person. This is also why I feel convinced that the ideal therapist, who presumably should be able as a professional necessity to understand another person in his uniqueness and in his wholeness without presupposition, ought to be at least a fairly healthy human being. I maintain this even though willing to grant unexplained individual differences in this kind of perceptiveness, and that also therapeutic experience can itself be a kind of training in the cognition of the being of another human being. This also explains why I feel that a training in aesthetic perceiving and creating could be a very desirable aspect of clinical training. Yes. I mean, I don't know. I definitely think they do. It's called transference. So I don't think enough time is spent on it, though, in all the little nuances of it, and how we do it all the time, and how to protect yourself, right? When you are doing it, like, wait a second, I don't even know this person. What am I doing? Right? Why am I classifying them already? Right? That's really what it is. They remind you of something or someone, and they go here in this little box. So I think it's a protection mechanism out of fear. Survival base. So that's really what it is. I mean, usefulness, obviously, but usefulness or harm. So that's where it was driven out of. Derived from. 14. At the higher levels of human maturation, many dichotomies, polarities, and conflicts are fused, transcended, or resolved. Self-actualizing people are simultaneously selfish and unselfish. Diason and Apollyon, individual and social, rational and irrational, fused with others and detached from others, and so on. It's radical self-love. Non-codependency. Self-care, right? The forgiveness of the self and compassion and, following your hopes, dreams, and desires, right? That's the selfish. And then unselfish is obviously being able to give all those things to others because you understand them, because you use them first on yourself, and then they flow out. So what I had thought to be straight-lined continua, whose extremes were polar to each other and as far apart as possible, turned out to be rather like circles or spirals in which the polar extremes came together into a fused unity. So also do I find this as a strong tendency in the full cognition of the object. The more we understand the whole of being, the more we can tolerate the simultaneous existence and perception of inconsistencies, of oppositions, and of flat contradictions. Tolerate, right? These seem to be products of partial cognition and fade away with cognition of the whole. The neurotic person, seen from a godlike vantage point, can then be seen as a wonderful, intricate, even beautiful unity of process. What we normally see as conflict and contradiction and dissociation can then be perceived as inevitable, necessary, even fated. That is to say, if he can be fully understood. Laurel, get off the table. Get, Laurel. Just one sec. Down. Sit. Good girl. Stay. Oh. That is to say, if he can be fully understood, then everything falls into a necessary place and he can be aesthetically perceived and appreciated. All his conflicts and splits turn out to have a kind of sense or wisdom. Even the concepts of sickness and of health may fuse and blur when we see the symptom as a pressure toward health, or see the neurosis as the healthiest possible solution at the moment to the problems of the individual. "15. The person at the peak is godlike not only in senses that I have touched upon already, but in certain other ways as well, particularly in the complete, loving, uncondemning, compassionate, and perhaps amused acceptance of the world and the person, however bad he may look at more normal moments. The theologians have long struggled with the impossible task of reconciling sin and evil and pain in the world with the concept of an all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing God. A subsidiary difficulty has been presented by the task of reconciling the necessity of rewards and punishments for good and evil with this concept of an all-loving, all-forgiving God. He must somehow both punish and not punish, both forgive and condemn. There's no condemning. But saying, in my view, in my world, right? We make heaven and hell right here. Obviously, we have to deal with all the elements and appreciate them, respect them. I think we can learn something about a naturalistic resolution of this dilemma from the study of self-actualizing people and from the comparison of the two broadly different types of perception discussed so far, i.e. B perception and D perception. B perception in a momentary thing ordinarily, B perception being, and D perception efficiency, right? It is a peak, a high spot, an occasional achievement. It looks as if all human beings perceived most of the time in a deficiency way. Every time. That is, they compare, they judge, they approve, they relate, they use. This means that it is possible for us to perceive another human being alternately in two different ways, sometimes in his being, as if he were the whole of the universe for a time being. Much more often, however, we perceive him as part of the universe and related to the rest of it in many complex ways. When we perceive him, then we can be all loving, all forgiving, all accepting, all admiring, all understanding, be amused, lovingly amused. But these are precisely the attributes assigned to most conceptions of a god, except for amusement, strangely lacking in most gods. In such moments, we can then be godlike in these attributes. For instance, in the therapeutic situation, we can relate ourselves in this loving, understanding, accepting, forgiving way to all sorts of people whom we normally fear and condemn and even hate. Murderers, rapists, exploiters, cowards. It is extremely interesting to me that all people behave at times as if they wanted to be cognized. They resent being classified, categorized, rubricized. Ticketing off a person as a waiter or policeman or a dame instead of as an individual often offends. We all want to be recognized and accepted for what we are in our fullness, richness, and complexity. If such an acceptor cannot be found among human beings, then the very strong tendency appears to project and create a godlike figure, sometimes a human one, sometimes supernatural. Another kind of answer to the problem of evil is suggested by the way in which our subjects accept reality as being in itself, in its own right. It is neither for man, nor is it against him. It just is impersonally what it is. An earthquake which kills possesses a problem of reconciliation only for the man who needs a personal God who is simultaneously all-loving, humorous, and omnipotent, and who created the world. For the man who can perceive and accept it naturalistically, impersonally, and uncreated, it presents no ethical or axiological problem since it wasn't done on purpose to annoy him. He shrugs his shoulders as if evil is defined anthropocentrically. He simply accepts evil as he does the seasons and the storms. It is in principle possible to admire the beauty of the blood or the tiger in the moment before it kills, or even to be amused by it. Of course, it is much harder to achieve this attitude with human actions which are hurtful to him. But it is occasionally possible, and the more matured the man is, the more possible it is. Keep what resonates, let go of what doesn't. And I mean, there are, from what we just read, right? So basically, if you think about things logically, without, bringing into it the higher elements of consciousness, really. If you just stay with your root and use that, I guess, is what a good way of explaining what his ideology or viewpoint stems from, just the basic there. 16. Perception in the peak moments tends strongly to be idiographic and non-classificatory. The percept, whether a person or the world or a tree or work of art, tends to be seen as a unique instance and as the only member of its class. This is in contrast to our normal, non-monolithic way of handling the world, which rests essentially on generalization and on Aristotelian division of the world into classes of various sorts, of which the object is an example or sample. The whole concept of classification rests upon general classes. If there were no classes, the concepts of resemblance, of equality or similarity, and of difference would become totally useless. One cannot compare two objects which have nothing in common. Furthermore, For two objects to have something in common means necessarily abstraction, e.g., such qualities as redness, roundness, heaviness, etc. But if we perceive a person without abstracting, if we insist upon perceiving all his attributes simultaneously and as necessary to each other, then we no longer can classify. Every whole person from this point of view, or every painting, or every bird, or every flower becomes the sole member of a class and must therefore be perceived ideographically, right? Ideographically. This willingness to see all aspects of the object means greater validity of perception. Sorry, I need to start getting really exhausted because I kept waking up last night and I thought I was ready to go. Like, I don't know. It's weird. It's like I'd sleep for a little bit of time and it would be such amazing sleep that I'd wake up like, must be morning now. Okay. 17. One aspect of the peak experience is a complete, though momentary loss of fear, anxiety, inhibition, defense, and control, a giving up of renunciation, delay, and restraint. The fear of disintegration and disillusion, the fear of being overwhelmed by the instincts, the fear of death and of insanity, the fear of giving in to unbridled pleasure and emotion, all tend to disappear or go into absence for the time being. This too implies a greater openness of perception since fear distorts. See, I said it was fear. It may be thought of as pure gratification, pure expression, pure elation, or joy, but since it is in the world, it represents a kind of fusion of the Freudian pleasure principle and reality principle. It is therefore still another instance of the resolution of ordinary dichotomous concepts at higher levels of psychological functioning. We may therefore expect to find a certain permeability in people who have such experiences commonly, a closeness and an openness to the unconscious, and a relative lack of fear of it. I don't know anybody like that. I don't think it's not having a fear of the unconscious. I think it's understanding how dark it really is, how far it goes. Yeah. Yes, it can be very frightening in some people, huh? Yes. Okay. 18. We have seen that in these various peak experiences, the person tends to become more integrated, more individual, more spontaneous, more expressive, more easy and effortless, more courageous, more powerful, etc. But these are similar or almost the same as the list of B values described in the previous pages. There seems to be a kind of dynamic parallelism or isomorphism here between the inner and the outer. Parallel, right? Mirroring. This is to say that as the essential being of the world is perceived by the person, so also does he concurrently come closer to his own being. to his own perfection of being more perfectly himself. This interaction effect seems to be in both directions, for as he comes closer to his own being or perfection for any reason, this thereby enables him more easily to see the B values in the world. As he becomes more unified, he tends to be able to see more unity in the world. As he becomes B playful, so is he more able to see B play in the world. As he becomes more strong, so is he able to see strength and power in the world. Each makes the other more possible, just as depression makes the world look less good and vice versa. He and the world become more like each other as they both move towards perfection, or as they both move towards loss of perfection. Master manifesting, right? Positive affirmations, meditation, clearing the mind, being. The more you walk in the being life, the more you walk in the being life and become a and draw to it, right? Like draw it near. It's, because of our energy, it just pulls, like attracts like. You guys know that. You guys know that. So, perhaps this is part of what is meant by the fusion of lovers, the becoming one with the world in the cosmic experience, the feeling of being part of the unity one perceives in a great philosophical insight. Also relevant are some inadequate data which indicate that some of our qualities which describe the structure of good paintings also describe the good human being, the B values of wholeness, uniqueness, aliveness. This, of course, is testable. Why, yes, it is. You can take my motivational assessment at goddess.ibodme, IBODME, @gmail.com, and I will have you see it. Testable. Did I just flip the page? Yeah. 19. It will be helpful to some readers if I now attempt briefly to put all of this in another frame of reference, which is more familiar to many, the psychoanalytic. Secondary process deal with the real world outside the unconscious. Logic, science, common sense, good adjustment, enculturation, responsibility, planning, rationalism are all secondary process techniques. The primary processes were first discovered in neurotics and psychotics, and then in children, and only recently in healthy people. The rules by which the unconscious work can be seen most clearly in dreams. Wishes and fears are the primary movers for the Freudian mechanisms. The well-adjusted, responsible, common-sense man who gets along well in the real world must usually do this in part by turning his back on his unconscious and denying and repressing it. For me, this realization came most keenly when I had to face the fact years ago that my self-actualizing subjects, picked because they were very mature, were at the same time also childish. I called it healthy childishness, a second naivete. It has also been recognized by Chris and the ego psychologists as regression in the service of the ego, not only found in healthy people, but finally conceded to a sine qua non of psychological health. Absolutely necessary. Love has also been conceded to be a regression, i.e., the person who can't regress can't love. And finally, the analysis agree that inspiration or great primary creativeness comes partly out of the unconscious, i.e., is a healthy regression, a temporary turning away from the real world. Now, what I have been describing here may be seen as a fusion of ego, id, superego, and ego ideal, of conscious and unconscious, of primary and secondary processes, a synthesizing of pleasure principle with reality principle, a regression without fear in the service of the greatest maturity, a true integration of the person at all levels. Redefinition of self-actualization. In other words, any person in any of the peak experiences takes on temporarily many of the characteristics which I have found in self-actualizing individuals. That is, for the time they become self-actualizers. We may think of it as a passing characterological change, if we wish, and not just as an emotional, cognitive, expressive state. Not only are these his happiest and most thrilling moments, but they are also moments of greatest maturity, individuation, fulfillment in a word. Not only are these his happiest and most thrilling moments, but they are also moments of greatest maturity, individuation, fulfillment, in a word, his healthiest moments. Think it's gonna rain? Okay. That makes it possible for us to redefine self-actualization in such a way as to purge it of its static and typological shortcomings, and to make it less a kind of all or none pantheon into which some rare people enter at the age of 60. We may define it as an episode or a spurt in which the powers of the person come together in a particularly efficient and intensely enjoyable way, and in which he is more integrated and less split, more open for experience, more idiosyncratic, more perfectly expressive or spontaneous or fully functioning, more creative, more humorous, more ego-transcending, more independent of his lower needs, etc. He becomes in these episodes more truly himself, more perfectly actualizing his potentialities closer to the core of his being. Such states or episodes can, in theory, come at any time in life to any person. What seems to distinguish those individuals I have called self-actualizing people is that in them these episodes seem to come far more frequently and intensely and perfectly than in average people. This makes self-actualization a matter of degree and of frequency rather than an all or nothing affair, and thereby makes it more amenable to available research procedures. We need no longer be limited to searching for these rare subjects who may be said to be fulfilling themselves most of the time. In theory, at least, we may also search any life history for episodes of self-actualization, especially those of artists, intellectuals, and other especially creative people, of profoundly religious people, and of people experiencing great insights in psychotherapy or in other important growth experiences. The question of external validity. I want to see where this, yeah. So far, I have described a subjective experience in phenomenological fashion. Its relationship to the external world is another matter altogether. Just because the perceiver believes that he perceives more truly and more fully is no proof that he actually does. The criteria for judging the validity of this belief ordinarily lie in the objects or persons perceived or in the products created. They are therefore, in principle, simple problems for the correlational research. But in what sense can art be said to be knowledge? The aesthetic perception certainly has its intrinsic self-validation. It is felt as a valuable and wonderful experience, but so also are some illusions and hallucinations. And furthermore, you may be aroused to be aroused to an aesthetic experience by a painting which leaves me untouched. If we are to go at all beyond the private, the problem of external criteria of validity remains, just as it does with all other perceptions. The same can be said for loving perception, for the mystic experience, for the creative moment, and for the flash of insight. The lover perceives in the beloved what no one else can, and again, there is no question about the intrinsic value of his inner experience and of the many good consequences for him, for his beloved, and for the world. If we take as an example the mother loving her baby, the case is even more obvious. Not only does love perceive potentialities, but it also actualizes them. The absence of love certainly stifles potentialities and even kills them. Personal growth demands courage, self-confidence, even daring, and non-love from the parent or the mate produces the opposite: self-doubt, anxiety, feelings of worthlessness, and expectations of ridicule, all inhibitors of growth and self-actualization. Although we have talked many times about overcoming these and how we do it, and that's what we do. So, don't let that stop you. Or think that, like I said, it's like a pendulum, so you have the ability to swing in the opposite direction, right? All personological and psychotherapeutic experience is testimonial to this fact that love actualizes and non-love stultifies, whether deserved or not. The complex and circular question then arises here: to what extent is this phenomenon a self-fulfilling prophecy, as Merton has called it, a husband's conviction that his wife is beautiful, or a wife's firm belief that her husband is courageous, to some extent creates the beauty or the courage? This is not so much of a perception of something that already exists as a bringing into existence by belief. See, that's how much we can do for those that we love too, because sometimes our belief in them can help assist them in their belief in themselves, right? I mean, they have to believe in themselves first, obviously, but it always helps to have cheerleaders. So we perhaps consider this an example of perception of potentiality, since every person has the possibility of being beautiful and courageous. If so, then this is different from perceiving the real possibility that someone may become a great violinist, which is not a universal possibility. And yet, even beyond all this complexity, the lurking doubts remain to those who hope ultimately to drag all these problems into the domain of public science. Frequently enough, love for another brings illusions, the perceptions of qualities and potentialities that don't exist, that are not therefore true. truly perceived but created in the mind of the beholder, and which then rests on a system of needs, repressions, denial, projections, and rationalizations. If love can be more perceptive than non-love, it can also be blinder. And the research problem remains to nag us which is which. How can we select those instances in which perception of the real world is more accurate? I have already reported my observations at this personological level. That one answer to this question lies in the variable of the psychological health of the perceiver, in or out of the love relationship. The greater the health, the more acute and penetrating the perception of the world, all other things being equal. Since this conclusion was the product of uncontrolled observation, it must be presented only as a hypothesis awaiting controlled research. In general, similar problems confront us in aesthetic and intellectual bursts of creativeness, and also in the insight experiences. In both instances, the external validation of the experience is not perfectly correlated with the phenomenological self-validation. Phenomenological. It is possible for the great insight to be mistaken, the great love to disappear. The poem that creates itself in a peak experience may have to be thrown away later as unsatisfactory. Creation of a product that will stand up feels subjectively the same as the creation of a product that folds up later under cold, objective, critical scrutiny. The habitually creative person knows this well, expecting half of its great moments of insights not to work. All peak experiences feel like being cognition, but not all are truly so. And yet we dare not neglect the clear hints that sometimes at least greater perceptivity and greater efficiency of cognition can be found in healthier people and in healthier moments, i.e., some peak experiences are B-Cognitions. I once suggested the principle that if self-actualizing people can and do perceive reality more efficiently, fully, and with less motivational contemplation than we others do, then we may possibly use them as biological essays. Though their greater sensitivity and perception, through their greater sensitivity and perception, we may get a better report of what reality is like than through our own eyes. Just as canaries can also be used to detect gas in mines before less sensitive creatures can. As a second string to the same bow, we may use ourselves in our most perceptive moments in our peak experiences, when for the moment we are self-actualizing, to give us a report of the nature of reality that is truer than we can ordinarily manage. It finally seems clear that the cognitive experiences I have been describing cannot be substitute for the routine, skeptical, and cautious procedures of science, however fruitful and penetrating these cognitions may be, and granting fully that they may be the best or only way of discovering certain kinds of truth. Yet the problems of checking, choosing, rejecting, confirming, and externally validating remain with us subsequent to the flash of insight. However, it seems silly to put them into an antagonistically exclusive, I don't know, antagonistically, I don't know, exclusive relationship. It must be obvious by now that they need each other and supplement each other in about the same way as do the frontiersman and the settler. Almost done. Yep. And then we'll be done with this whole chapter. It will be all over. The after effects of peak experiences. Completely separable from the question of the external validity of cognition in the various peak experiences is that of the after effects upon the person of these experiences, which in still another sense may be said to validate the experience. I have no controlled research data to present. I have only the unanimous agreement of my subjects that were such affects my own conviction that were and that there were, and the complete agreement of all the writers on this creativeness, love, insight, mystic experience, and aesthetic experience. On these grounds, I feel justified in making at least the following affirmations or propositions, all of which are testable. 1. Peak experiences may and do have some therapeutic effect in strict sense of removing symptoms. I have at least 2 reports, one from a psychologist, one from an anthropologist, of mystic or oceanic experiences so profound as to remove certain neurotic symptoms forever after. Such conversation experiences are, of course, plentiful recorded in human history, but so far as I know have never received the attention of psychologists or psychiatrists. 2. They can change the person's view of himself in a healthy direction. 3. They can change his view of other people and his relations to them in many ways. 4. They can change more or less permanently his view of the world or aspects of parts of it. 5. They can release him for greater creativity, spontaneity, expressiveness, and idiosyncrasy. I say synchronicity all the time. Why can't I say this? Idiosyncrasy. What the? Anyway, you guys already know, so stop making fun of me. I know you are. So, I make fun of myself. It's hilarious. 6. He remembers the experience as a very important and desirable happening and seeks to repeat it. 7. The person is more apt to feel that life in general is worthwhile, even if it is usually drab, pedestrian, painful, or ungratifying, since beauty, excitement, honesty, play, goodness, truth, and meaningfulness have been demonstrated to him to exist. This is the perfect way to end these videos. Spelling with my people. I love you all. Many other effects could be reported that are ad hoc and idiosyncratic. I said it. Depending on the particular person and his particular problems, which he considers to be solved or seen in a new light as the result of his experience. I think that these after effects can all be generalized, and a feeling for them communicated if the peak experience could be likened to a visit to a personally defined heaven, from which the person then returns to earth. Desirable after effects of such an experience, some universal and some individual, are then seen to be practically inevitable. And may I also emphasize that such after effects of aesthetic experience, creative experience, love experience, mystic experience, insight experience, and other peak experiences are pre-consciously taken for granted and commonly expected by artists and art educators, by creative teachers, by religious and philosophical theorists, by loving husbands, mothers, and therapists, and by many others. On the whole, these good after effects are easy enough to understand. What is more difficult to explain is the absence of discernible after effects in so many people. I just wanted to read these notes really quick. I made no effort to explore, nor did any of my subjects spontaneously speak of what may be called the nadir experiences, e.g., to some painful and crushing insights into the inevitability of aging and death, of ultimate aloneness and responsibility of the individual, of the impersonality of nature, of the nature of unconsciousness, etc. And then 2, compare, and if a man could pass through paradise in a dream, and have a flower presented to him as a pledge that his soul had really been there, and if he found that flower in his hand when he awoke, and what then? E. Schneider. Poetry and Prose, Reinhardt, 1951. Awesome. Well, we're all done, you guys. I can't believe I've been doing this. Like, in 1 month, it will be 1 year. It's crazy. So, well, I will be coming back in a different way, and I haven't decided what that way is yet for sure. I know that my vlogging will be kind of similar to what I've been doing on iBodme now and on the paid version of YouTube. So, like I said, if any of you would like to come over and do the assessment, just email me at goddess.ibodme@gmail.com. And I just want to say thank you so much. This has been such a unique experience through such a weird transition in my life. It was super painful at times, and I can't believe that all I was able to accomplish since I started blogging and holding myself accountable to the things that I desire and deserve in my life. And when I started, I obviously had no idea where this was going to go, or that I was going to turn it into this weekly programming or deprogramming, you know. And I actually absolutely love it, so I'm super excited to be able to share it on iBodme, and super grateful for those of you who've been with me along the way here, and helping me in the beginning. So just by being there, and yeah, being my family outside, my family, my radical self-lovers. Thank you so much for everything you have done. So I'll see you on the other side of at iBodme. Oneness. Let's forget my wound. Ciao ciao for now, y'all.